So we're going to begin then with day 308. So we're in the section on generating bodhicitta, and we've covered the first method of the 7-point cause and effect meditation. And we're moving now into the second method of equalizing and exchanging self for other. So I just wanted to briefly share the kind of an overview of the steps that are involved. I think I'll wait, until we get to the respective steps in this method to go into more detail. But you can see that it's different. So some parts of it are the same, and some parts of it are different. It begins with that same preliminary step of equanimity. There's no difference there, and that's actually what day 308 is about. There is some difference when we get to the second step, the kindness of sentient beings. And then you can see that, oh, I'm missing, I don't know. So it should be step 9, and it was, I don't know. Yep, there we go. Okay, so so you can see that some of the steps are the same, but there's, step 3, step 4, step 5, step 6, step 7. There are differences. Some of those are very new in this method. And then great compassion and great love in step 7 is the same kind of end result, but you use the Tonglen meditation to accomplish it, which is different, unique. So, and then it is step 8 and step 9 are the same. The extraordinary attitude of individual responsibility is the same. And then, of course, it culminates in the same bodhicitta. But you can see that with this method, there are additions and changes as compared to the previous. Okay, so we'll just kind of glance at day 308 because it is the same equanimity that we've already looked at in the 7-point cause and effect, the preliminary realization of equanimity is the same for both, which is where the quotation for day 308 is, we are all equal in both wanting happiness and wanting to be free of suffering. So this is the same preliminary step of generating the mind of equanimity. And this is focused on the way that we label sentient beings and the way that we relate to sentient beings independent upon that label. We have a tendency as ordinary beings to prefer that people are kind to us. They engage in supportive, beneficial actions. They see things the same way that we do. We feel comfortable around them. We don't prefer that people are unkind, that they maybe act in ways that we think are harmful or destructive, or they strongly disagree with our core values and so on. And then I'm just going to switch because there's a little bit of something with this application that's weird. So I'm going to just switch here and then it'll stop doing that because I don't need that again. Okay, so, and then of course, when people act against our interests, when they hold views that we find really difficult to deal with, then we label them as a quote unquote enemy, a difficult person. And when people have not yet had a chance to do either of those, then we just say, well, that's a stranger. I don't know what their intentions are. I don't know what their values are. I don't know if they're likely to work for my benefit or they're likely to oppose my interests. So we put them in the stranger category. And that's how we tend to relate to all sentient beings. Even, of course, with animals, we would say, well, they're, you know, for the most, we do the same thing, really. Most animals, like most humans, are strangers to us because they're just sort of vaguely out there in the world. Sometimes an animal is, barking aggressively at us, or they're acting aggressively, or they, cat scratched us or something, and then we feel kind of aversive to that particular animal. And then sometimes we have a pet, we care for it very much. A neighbor has a pet that is very friendly to us, and we feel warmly toward that pet. And if that neighbor asked us to look after that pet, we'd be happy to. Whereas if there was another pet that always, growled at us, and that neighbor asked us to look after that pet, we would say, probably no, thank you. So we label all of the sentient beings that we interact with in the same way. It isn't just humans. We also, because we can only interact. And then, of course, Buddhism would suggest that the beings of all of the other realms are strangers to us as well, because, they really can't work for our benefit, nor can they work for, against our interests. So we can't interact with them. But if we were to bring them to mind in some way, our natural inclination would be the same, that as bringing to mind the idea of a stranger who just lives in Germany that we've never met. So it's how we label and how we interact with every sentient being. And this is the same equanimity that we have to generate, where we recognize that those labels are superficial, they're not significant, they don't mean anything of any value. What does have value is that all of those sentient beings are suffering sentient beings, and they all have an equal claim to being happy and to being free of that suffering. And so it makes logical, valid sense to work for the benefit of all sentient beings, rather than these very, very superficial categories that are changeable across lifetimes. They're changeable even within short periods of time, days, weeks. Sentient beings move from one or the other categories. And so those categories are intrinsically superficial and meaningless. And seeing through that is the same insight for either of these methods for generating bodhicitta. Okay. So then day 309, Lama Zopa is saying there is no external enemy. The only real enemy is the self-cherishing thought. So, and again, we've said, so this is getting into here, going, a little bit out of order in terms of that historical progression, because this is kind of looking at the faults of self-cherishing, which is on that list, but it's a little bit lower down in the historical order of the contemplations for engaging in the meditation on using this for generating bodhicitta. But in any event, that's the contemplation that's presented here, is the faults of self-cherishing. So he goes on to say, as long as we hold self-cherishing in our heart, enlightenment, liberation, and bodhicitta are all impossible. Attaining any of the Lamrim realizations, such as perfect human rebirth or the realization of death and of impermanence and death, is impossible. Not one single action in our day from morning until night can become Dharma, and hence the cause of happiness. The self-cherishing thought fills our mind, and they're giving us no space to think of others or to develop compassion and loving kindness. So again, self-cherishing isn't just looking after the self in a reasonable way. It is putting our interests, our desires, our preferences above those of any other sentient being, and thinking that only the pursuit of my interests, my desires, my preferences is of any validity and has any meaning. And so particularly when we come into conflict with the interests of someone else, we will always prioritize. And particularly, really it's short-term, interests that are the easiest to give rise to, just comfort, the 8 worldly concerns, which is a topic that Geshe Dundrup is going to, be addressing here in a couple of weeks on Sundays. Looking at our preoccupation with wealth and status and reputation and comfort, and the fear that we have of losing whatever degree of those that we've been able to amass. So as long as that is kind of at the forefront, as long as that is running the show, as Venerable Rabina says, then we'll be blocked from having the interest, the time, to put into our practice, because we will constantly be just thinking about what is it that makes just this life. Because again, it might seem strange to say that a great scope insight is relevant to the small scope, but which is kind of what Lama Zopa just said. But the small scope, the entryway into being a practitioner is someone who cares more about future lives than they care about the content of just this one life. So really, from that Buddhist perspective, we might be interested in Buddhism. We might be, trying, we might be striving in the Buddhist path, but until we actually can say that we validly care more about future lives than just the content of this life, we're not really practicing, Buddhism. So that's why this self-preoccupation isn't, we won't completely get rid of it, until the later parts of the practice, of the stages of the path. But if we don't make progress on it, even from the beginning, then really those temporary short-term interests will be all that we ever focus on. How do I get more wealth, more comfort, more status, better reputation, and so on? Any thoughts or questions so far?
Yeah, Venerable, Chris and I have probably talked about this over the years, just when it comes up, the kind of the interesting aspect of the lay people having jobs, homes, etc. I mean, we have a pretty simple life here up in Minnesota. But having said that, if it weren't for the lay people having a livelihood, and if they have extra money, that they support the Dharma. They support those in robes, etc. So it seems like, are we talking about extravagant lifestyles, or just a whole mental attitude about amassing wealth?
Yeah, I think it's not, it's certainly not suggesting that, because even, I mean, that sort of temptation and that sort of, it certainly isn't only lay people, because often the monastics have to fulfill certain obligations in order, they might get, certain monastics might get a reputation for being good at at anything, at painting, at making tankas, at producing statues, at giving teachings, um, and they might they can get benefactors, who appreciate that. And so it's certainly not just lay people that deal with, and they give teachings. And then if there's a lot of people in the audience, then after the teaching, those people will make monetary offerings. So there's some like, well, if I can get more and more people in the audience, then I'll get more and more monetary, offerings. And or oh, I have received an invitation at this place or this place, and I know that, there's not so many people there, and there's a lot of people there. And so, like, how do I, what invitation do I accept? So these thoughts and these temptations, they're certainly not just for people who are working, 9 to 5 kind of non dark, jobs of that sort. They're, even if it's just comfort and status and reputation, and maybe not so much, but, there's all kinds of ways in which it applies to everyone. Um, but yeah, it isn't about, you know, of course, there isn't a clear, like, defined, you know, this is this is the line, right? And then this is above the line, and this is below the line in terms of how much of any of these things. Um, because, certainly, um, a person who knows how much, I mean, exactly how much income, because then, of course, you also want to save for the future in case, you get hit by a car, or, so you may have money that you're safeguarding for some eventuality that may or may not ever happen. Um, and, and then how much, how much is that? Is that $100,000 in the bank? Is it $300,000? Dementia, Alzheimer's. I mean, there's all kinds of really expensive things, and you might be trying to plan for various things and trying to make reasonable decisions, and people, might make different things, and then, of course, like, do I have to have a $8,000 car? Can I have a $20,000 car? I mean, so it isn't like there's a line that's like that. This is the right answer and this is the wrong answer. But um, it's kind of, it's about how disturbing it is to one's own mind when one thinks about one's motivation, because certainly there are people who are never satisfied with however much comfort and wealth and status, and it feeds into needing more and needing more and needing more, even though, there's nothing that could happen to them that would deplete, their savings and so on. And so it's kind of about, am I being logical, reasonable, balanced in the decisions that I'm making? Because, of course, like, people should be able to, go on a vacation, and not feel like, oh, that's terrible, that I spent a couple $1,000s, once or twice a year to go on vacation, that, like, that's some sort of monstrous thing. But it's about, like, putting things in proper perspective and understanding that sure, yes, I enjoy these things, and it's fine to enjoy those things, but I understand the limitations of those things. I'm not um, pursuing things that are completely, irrational, um, and valuing things in a way that is completely divorced from what they actually are, and their impermanent transitory nature. It's just kind of, can a person say that the way that they're approaching these issues is reasonable and balanced and not really a cause of their own suffering, because that mind that is never satisfied, that is always, that's a painful mind to have. um, if your bank account goes down 1% because something happened in the stock market, and a person is spiraling for days and days, and yelling at people, and then there's something out of balance there. um, but of course, your bank account could, if you have everything in the stock market, there have been big, people have lost 50% over the course of 6 months. And that's, of course, stressful. Like, that's difficult. But when that's happening, like, am I applying mind training? Am I trying to, what am I turning to? Am I turning to my practice and trying to cultivate, a balanced view? Am I just lashing out at people? Am I, getting, when challenges arise, like, how are we responding? What are we turning toward when we're trying to deal with difficult things that are happening? Because person might not be attached to their house, but their house might burn down, and now they're homeless, and that's objectively a big deal. Like, that's a massive change. So of course, it's not unreasonable to be upset, to be depressed, but am I turning toward my practice when that kind of thing happens? Am I looking for a way of relating to that in a deeper way? Am I using it to fuel my renunciation? Or am I only falling off and just spiraling and getting angry, and you know so um, and in order to be prepared for those bigger things, we have to practice, with all of the tiny things that are happening day by day by day, and getting, all of that familiarity. And then hopefully we've amassed enough time and practice. Of course, hopefully those big things never happen, but if they do happen, hopefully we've practiced enough with the daily things that we have more spaciousness, and we know that we can rely on our practice to um, and of course, still, you fill out the right paperwork, you go to the bank, you do all of the ordinary things that people do in those situations. You get a grant, you don't just be like, oh well, I guess I'm homeless now, and that's fine. And we're allowed to you know have a reasonable pursuit of all of the status and wealth. And it can become something that takes over our lives and becomes the focus. you know so, like what you were saying in terms of people that might support a monastery or something, you know certainly they have a job and so on, but they don't see, that they're doing something very valuable. They're doing something, because they have access to wealth. They are able to engage in virtue with that. Whereas, someone who doesn't have access to that wealth, they have to find some other way of engaging in virtue, like, printing Dharma materials, or, making statues, or making tankas, or cleaning the gompa, or, they're finding other ways of engaging in virtue. And they've decided that that's the purpose of their life. So if a person decides that engaging in virtue is the purpose of their life, then they're using various tools to accomplish that, but they're not getting, overwhelmed or overly caught up in, the eight worldly concerns.
Thank you.
So now I can spotlight myself. Okay. So then really, same thing is being said in day 310. The quotation is all life's problems come from the selfish attitude. Lama Yeshe says the self-cherishing mind is worried about only me. The self-existent I, bodhicitta, substitutes others for self. It creates space in the mind. So, this is getting at the idea we think that, we need to do whatever is necessary to pursue our own interests, but even if it is in conflict with others and so on. And what Shanti Deva and different people or different masters point out is that really we're just mistaken about, we want happiness, but we're mistaken about how to accomplish it. That when we have that view of competitiveness, of being willing or to step on other people on the way to our interests, our goals, ultimately that causes suffering in our own mind. And giving that up and having that spaciousness, thinking about how can I, instead of going into every situation thinking, how do I make this work out for just oneself, we think, how do I make this work out for all of the people that I'm interacting with? How do I, what actions and, what behaviors can I engage in that are designed to accomplish not my own welfare, but the welfare of others? And Geshe-la on Sunday will be teaching on the 8 verses of thought transformation, which is all very relevant, to these topics. So again, this is still on the faults of self-cherishing, these 3 contemplations. He says, get rid of the false concept of self-cherishing and we'll be free of all misery and dissatisfaction. Concern ourselves with the welfare of all others and wish for them to attain the highest realization, such as bodhicitta, and we'll find all happiness and satisfaction. Okay, so then day 311, now we're kind of moving back to that historical list of the order of the contemplations, where in a way there was that similarity. This is understanding the kindness of others and then also ultimately wishing to repay that kindness. And it is a bit different in this contemplation as compared to the 7-point cause and effect meditation, because in that meditation, although we have the same general idea, the archetype that is really specifically and only used in the 7-point cause and effect meditation is seeing all sentient beings as having been one's mother. So, of course, that meditation therefore had that previous step of that, and then also separately focusing on the kindness. So you have to literally think about the beginningless and endless nature of the mind and so on, in order to establish that all sentient beings have played that specific role. But in the equalizing and exchanging self for other, it's a broader contemplation when we think of the kindness of others. we would do so not only through that one, we might use that as one aspect of the contemplation, um, but it's a broader contemplation as well. We can think about all of the, the water that we've, all of the things that we've needed and used to support our existence, to give meaning to our existence. So we think of all of the various ways in which sentient beings have been kind, because um, you know the mother isn't necessarily the one that's growing food, for us to eat. They're not necessarily getting up at 4 a.m. and going out and, tilling the fields and washing the food, and then of course you have the people that are, you have doctors that maybe are saving our lives from time to time, and you have teachers who, even, spiritual guides and so on, um, all kinds of people that manufacture our clothing, our homes, that allow for clean water and, you know, um, electricity to get to us. So we can have a much more expanded kind of meditation on the kindness of others. Um, and that's the way that it is presented in the equalizing and exchanging self or others. We're encouraged to consider other kinds of roles that sentient beings are playing for us and the kindness that we're receiving from them, um, uh, in addition to the kind of kindness that a mother shows for her child. And of course, certainly true that um, that they're not all, a mother might be someone who's willing to lay down their life. And that might not be true of a farmer or a doctor, or, so it isn't to say that we shouldn't think about that too, but it's just we try to look at a variety of angles when we are thinking about all of the different ways in which we've been benefited. And so in a way, it can be because it's more global and there are more different types of examples, could be that, um, you know and then also one way in which that's different is that all of the sentient beings that are alive right now, that we're engaging with, we can bring to mind, we can try to feel that about them in maybe a more immediate way, not just thinking, well, the only way that I'm able to contemplate this is by thinking about lives that I don't remember that happened, you know, perhaps billions and billions of years ago. And, maybe I was a gnat or something and they were a mother gnat. You kind of, it can be a little bit more powerful to actually think, well, this living person right here in front of me is kind, in all of these ways, rather than just only being able to think about it and, in terms of this one particular archetype. So that's how, even though it seems quite similar, there's a difference in the way we're encouraged to engage with those two different contemplations. Any thoughts or questions so far? So then, in terms of the benefits, the next section is the benefits of cherishing others. So we looked at the disadvantages of self-cherishing. We looked at the kindness of sentient beings, and now we're looking at the advantages of cherishing others, which means to cherish others even more than one cherishes oneself. So this is day 312. The quotation is, cherishing even one sentient being brings us to Buddhahood. Then in the commentary it says, without the existence of suffering sentient beings, there is no way we can actualize bodhicitta. Therefore, every single living being is unbelievably precious and can benefit us so much. Living beings are our real teacher. So, again, this is one of the ways in which we can think about, that all of our good qualities come from, that these beneficial habits, tendencies of the mind, to whatever degree we're able to find it easy to practice generosity or patience or ethics or loving kindness, or these are all states of mind, tendencies, habits that we've developed in relation to sentient beings. And so even if a sentient being is providing us a difficult situation, without difficult situations, we never increase our capacity for patience. We never increase our capacity for even loving kindness that goes beyond just a reciprocal kind of loving kindness. Oh, this person is nice to me, and therefore I'm willing to be nice to them, and in return being able to actually have compassion and wish for the benefit of someone that seems like they are acting against our interests. That is necessary. That is a familiarity. That is a tendency. That's, you could even say a skill, a capacity that if we wish to achieve enlightenment, we can't just skip, and we can't just think that it doesn't have to be like that. I don't actually have to get to that point, because we do. We might not be there today, but in order to achieve our own wish to become enlightened, there will have to be a point where that is true about how we relate to sentient beings. And if we decide that I never need to make any progress toward that goal, or that goal isn't necessary, then we will continually be blocking ourselves from accomplishing that goal. So, even in the presentation of these challenging scenarios, we are being given the tools for our own enlightenment. And if we never meet, we should rejoice. But Buddhism would suggest that every time we have an opportunity to actually engage in an act of generosity, or an act of patience, or an act of ethical restraint, or so on, that we should see that as establishing these tendencies, these habits, these familiarities that are necessary, that we can't just assume will sort of magically be there, that will be what brings us to enlightenment, because that is the method that allows them to be there, is responding appropriately to a difficult situation rather than giving in to the inappropriate way of responding. Rather than responding with anger, choosing to respond with kindness, or with compassion, or with patience.
Venerable?
Yep.
Not that this is a realistic concern of mine at the moment, but my question is, if one truly develops bodhicitta, ultimate bodhicitta, and places everyone else before yourself, how do you physically survive? I mean, someone's always going to be hungrier than you are. Someone's always going to be colder than you are. Someone's, on and on. And if you are truly more concerned with them than you are with yourself, how do you physically survive?
So I would say that you would have to look at ultimately, I mean, of course, it's helpful and beneficial to engage in sort of overt, actions as much as we can, to whatever degree is sustainable. Um, but also, as you're saying, it that can be unsustainable. That can reach an unsustainable level, because sentient beings are limitless. In terms of the that what they would need in order to be. But if we look at all of the bodhisattvas, all of the Buddhas, that was always true. There were always a limitless number of starving and oppressed, so on, other sentient beings. And but if you look at why, if you look at what is the cause, the actual cause of those experiences, it's the ripening of negative karma in the minds of sentient beings that is the true origin of why those karmic experiences are ripening for sentient beings. So that is, so a person could go, as you're saying, like just sort of live at the bare subsistence, kind of level and try to give away absolutely everything. And they'd make very little dent in that mass of suffering through that particular approach. So that's not really the approach. I mean, of course, as I say, if it's something sustainable and it's within our means and we're seeing it as a training in, like this isn't going to, cause me to become homeless, or, it's not going to be overly difficult. And this person is in front of me and there's something in the moment that they, so Buddhism certainly isn't suggesting that we completely ignore those sorts of problems that sentient beings are facing. If you're passing someone on the street and they're bleeding, you don't just think, well, they're bleeding because, some negative karma is arising in their mind and how unfortunate that is. And I wish they didn't have negative karma in their mind. That's not, Buddhism certainly isn't suggesting that. But, so you do what you can do in the moment to, call 911 and stop and, do what's possible. But you have to balance that with, this idea of like, gallivanting around the world and trying to completely obliterate, every single disease and every single, it can't be done, in that sense. But the only thing that we can do, therefore, is to put all of our, the bulk of, however much time and attention and effort that we can into our achieving of our enlightenment. Because then we aren't, because let's say that we do, the reverse of that, even though we won't really reduce that much suffering, if that is the only thing every single day that we, think about is, this disease and this country and this what have you, then we're going to die at the end of that process. And we never really put aside enough time and energy and effort into our actual practice because we were thinking about truly existent I and truly existent other and, truly existent suffering. And we were reinforcing kinds of, because we never overcame, even virtuous actions are contaminated by grasping at a truly existent self, a truly existent action, a truly existent other. So there's still the cause karmically of more ordinary existence, even if it's better than creating the cause of the lower realms. So Buddhism, is saying that's really the focus. When they achieve enlightenment, they will be free of all suffering. And so we should be focused primarily on that, on achieving our enlightenment in order to bring them to their enlightenment. If we have any other approach, it won't really be effective. It won't, they will be more comfortable for a brief period of time, but then we die and they die, and that cycle of karmic appearance continues. So, like I say, we do have to find some sort of balance of not just, never engaging in acts of, overt acts of generosity or charity or, giving our time, but we can see those as part of our practice, and also thinking that we need to spend time actually studying, actually meditating, going on retreat and doing, other things as well. And I think certainly Buddhism, could do, particularly in the West, I think Buddhism could do a better job of encouraging overt, I think to some degree, I think you can go a little bit too far, and kind of have that sort of spiritually bypassing sort of view, where it's like, well, they're ordinary beings, and so samsara is a broken realm, and there's nothing we can do. It's ultimately we have to strike a balance, but there's value. Those sentient beings who are experiencing, whatever they're experiencing, that is, if we look at the teachings on precious human rebirth, they are one of the reasons that they're finding it more difficult than we are to make spiritual progress is because of the arising of those conditions. And perhaps if they were reduced, then they would also find it, easier to make spiritual progress. And we should want that for them too. So, but certainly I think it's, it's absolutely the case that it isn't about just only ever having enough to not die, and anything above that is wrong and bad and problematic.
Thank you. So it would appear that wisdom is the other wing.
Yeah, we have to temper, not just because if we can't sustain it, if it's if we go hungry, then we're not really of any real benefit to sentient beings. We have to have the time and the space, and if even if we push too hard, and then we resent it, and then we think, well, why don't they appreciate me? Why aren't they? And then then we'll have resentment toward sentient beings. So even just going beyond, we should try to think about where our boundaries are and gradually extend those boundaries. But if we do that too quickly, ultimately the whole thing can sort of collapse, because we have this aspiration to be able to engage in this level of practice that we can get to, but that we're not actually at on that day. And then we think, well, why didn't they, respond in the way that I wanted them to respond? I did this great thing. And then we're like, well, forget these sentient beings. And when we have that view, then we've given up sentient beings, and that's incredibly harmful for so it's much better really to, go in a gradual way and only engage in acts of charity and generosity and so on, that we're not going to end up regretting or going to end up generating a sense of resentment, because we don't want to ever, give up that attitude of caring for sentient beings because they didn't, we did some big thing and they were like, well, whatever, or I think that's, I'm going to do one more. It's really just day 3, day 313 is another quotation and another discussion on the advantages of cherishing others. And again, Lama Yeshe is saying that it's, of course, very difficult. I think it's probably the most difficult thing that a person can do is to try to reverse that standard, sort of that path of least resistance that we've all become so deeply habituated to, and instead, think more about others. But he says if we can do it, it will help solve all of our problems. Changing our outlook in this way transforms whatever misery we perceive into the peaceful path of liberation. He says we desperately need a method such as this. So, like I say, it isn't about when we think about the mass, the extraordinary mass of suffering sentient beings. It's really, the question is, what is within my capacity to do that's truly effective? It isn't that we say, we don't narrow our focus. We don't say, well, I don't actually care about all of the suffering sentient beings, but we think, what is the response? What is the actually truly beneficial response to that? And what we can control is our study, our practice, our familiarities, our own progress toward achieving enlightenment. That's something we can't control. How many diseases there are, or whether there are, effective treatments, or whether there's vaccines, or whether this country is experiencing a deep recession, or but we can control what is the content of my own mind. That's the only thing that we have control over, is what, day by day, what am I becoming more and more familiar with? What are the tendencies? What are the habits that I'm generating in my own mind? And are they taking me closer to enlightenment or further away from enlightenment? And then, all we're giving up then is just thinking that our comfort, our status, our wealth, and so on is the only thing that's relevant, is more important than anything else. And so we develop the time and the space to engage in practice and to engage in truly beneficial, actions. So that's, any thoughts or questions? All right, so we'll leave it there on day 313 for today. Unless there's any final thoughts or questions. Yes, David, did you have?
I was just gonna say thank you. I'm using the safe driving mode, so I don't, crash into any cars or anything. But I didn't know. It looks like it raises my hand when I press the speak button. But yeah, I was just gonna say thank you for teaching today, and sorry for being late. I was at work, but usually I try to tune in as soon as the class starts. But
All right, so we'll end with dedication. So bring to mind the altruistic motivation or intention that we established, and we think that by having listened, participated, we've actualized that motivation, created positive energy in the mind, and that positive energy will ripen in the future in a beneficial way. So we think of the spiritually meaningful, supportive, beneficial way in which we are offering and sealing, dedicating our practice. How you want your positive energy to ripen. I think strongly that it will ripen in that way. All right, so today is Thursday. So have a good weekend.
thank you.
We'll meet up again on Monday.
Thanks, Venerable. Take care.